So, shall we start the session or?
Of course.
Okay. So, dear and respected friend, thank you so much for your kind participation in today's GSDS Weekly Forum dialogue. It is a great pleasure and indeed an honor to have available with us one of the brilliant mind of India, Dr. Ravi Sinha, and the topic on which we are going to talk or have a dialogue is challenges before democracy in India. On behalf of Gandhian School of Democracy and Socialism Forum, I welcome Professor Anand Kumar, chair of today's session. I welcome Dr. Ravi Sinha, keynote speaker or main speaker of today's session. I welcome Professor Gyan Gului, Miniti Pradhanji, Sugyan Modiji, and all friends co-present here. GSDS Forum stands for Gandhian School of Democracy and Socialism Forum, which is a platform to promote understanding of the dynamics of society with quest for freedom, justice, equality, and fraternity. It focuses on knowledge and dialogue among concerned persons. We organize dialogue on every Friday, and we invite creative minds to discuss idea of democracy, justice, and equality. So let me also give a kind of brief introduction to our speaker, Dr. Ravi Sinha, who is a kind of person earlier in the beginning of his career engaged in research in theoretical physics. Brilliant mind. He completed his PhD from MIT Cambridge. But he changed his orientation of life, of understanding politics, society, and culture. He has written many important articles, thought-provoking book, and I can recall one of his excellent books, Globalization of Capital, which was published in 1997. He continuously writes, and we know him from his brilliant engagement with New Socialist Initiative. And he has a very profound knowledge about politics, democracy, and present crisis, that is fascism, communalism, and the problems of legitimacy crisis. So, we invite Professor Anand Kumar to give a kind of brief introduction of the topic, that is challenges before democracy in India, and then we'll invite Professor Dr. Ravi Sinha. So, Professor Anand Kumar, over to you.
Thank you, Ranjit Gautamji. I'm very thankful to Professor Ravi Sinha for being available for the weekly engagement of global dialogue of Gandhian School of Democracy and Socialism. Today, we are going to be benefiting from a lifelong engagement of a concerned scientist about justice, equality, and progress. We became a parliamentary democracy 75 years ago. So it is in the fitness of things that we invite somebody who has been always very concerned about the idea of justice within the frame of parliamentary democracy, as an Indian who was proud of our freedom struggle, but was worried about the post-colonial dynamics of power. We talk about democracy in three ways. One is the idea of democracy as a value system, and we know that we have a lot of deficiencies. We are temperamentally not very democratic, as pointed out 75 years ago by Dr. Ambedkar himself. Very thin soil for the value system of democracy, because we are a hierarchical society informed by the discourse of power within caste structures, and of course, an overlay of communalism, regionalism, and sexism. Then many people talk about democracy as a set of institutions: legislature, bureaucracy, judiciary, media, civil society, universities, and political parties. These are 7 pillars of democracy for we Indians. And all pillars are shaking very badly. So, what will be the future of this structure, which is contingent upon the strength of these pillars? There are others who talk about democracy as a process. So, electoral system, the malpractices, increasing role of money power, role of EVM machine, the idea of first past the post and its deficiencies, crisis of party system, lack of leadership promotion systems, because we don't have faith in the democratic process of leadership building like student union, teachers union, trade union, occupational unions, voluntary associations of resident welfare societies, gram panchayat. Nowhere we put our faith in the idea of representation and participation. So without taking much time, I'm alerting all of the participants who are around 35, 40 people that Ravi Sinha has 2 qualities. One, he mesmerizes you because of the logic of his presentation. 2, he disturbs you profoundly. All the assumptions which are there in most of us get disturbed and we become quite confused at the end of the discussion. And probably that is the purpose of GSDS also. Don't feel settled, don't feel relaxed, get anxious, get inquiring, and get going. Thank you, Raviji, and I invite you on behalf of GSDS to make a presentation in next 35-40 minutes, which will be followed by a session of around 15 to 20 minutes of questions and answers. Professor Ravi Sinha, please.
Thank you, Professor Anand, Kumar, and Gautam ji for your kind words and for having me here. I will start right away, and I will start by stating the obvious, or rather assuming the obvious, which is that the crisis of Indian democracy is real. What India is going through is not only traumatic, it spells out the threats of a very disturbing future for us. Of course, I'm saying that I'm assuming the obvious because there is a significant percentage or portion of our population which thinks that India is doing great, that after 800 or 1200 years, whichever way they count, Hindu rule has come to India. They think that we are on the rise, and the society, the system, politics, everything is doing well. Of course, those who are under a spell of the reigning ideology, for them, obvious is not obvious. Obvious is the elephant in the room that they are not able to see. So that is why I said that I will start with assuming the obvious, that the crisis is real. The crisis is not only of Indian democracy, the crisis is wider. And hopefully in the time that I have, I will be able to touch upon some of the wider issues also. The crisis is of the entire society, which is divided, which is very fractious, which is full of hate, and politics is generating these divisive policies and this hateful atmosphere or divisive atmosphere for electoral political gains. So there is a social crisis engineered by political forces that rule us. There is economic crisis, which is leading to sharp and accelerated polarization of economic power. And then there is political monopolization of power, where all the institutions, all the checks and balances that we have in our constitutional framework, I will come to that a little more later, they are being subverted. But this evening, I will concentrate mostly on the crisis of democracy, or the challenges that democracy in India is facing. Instead of going into the details of how this crisis is unfolding and what are the signature developments, for me to call this a crisis, instead of counting that, again, I will assume that you all are familiar as well as I am, or better than me, of those details. I will focus mostly on how to understand this crisis and this challenge to democracy. The first point, in my opinion, to note is that this is a crisis that is happening in a democratic setup, not for the first time, but it is in India, it has come to fruition for the first time. And this is a crisis that can be described as democracy undoing itself. The challenge to democracy is coming from the democratic process itself. In order to unpack it a little bit, what do I mean by democracy undoing itself? I would like to look at democracy in two broad components or aspects of it. One is the institutional framework of democracy. Institutional framework that, for example, the best example of that will be the Constitution. That is the formal legal foundation of our democracy. And there are other elements of that institutional framework. I will not go into details of counting them, but the main point being that the institutional framework of democracy, starting with the Constitution, that encapsulate the democratic values, which arise from the modern history of humanity. So the first point is that the democratic values that are enshrined in the Constitution are not an outcome of Indian history alone. The democratic values are far larger, far wider, far deeper, and many societies, many countries, many civilizations have contributed to the emergence of those democratic values, and they're getting enshrined into, or they're being realized in the form of modern democracies all over the world. Even this history is not very old, and in a way, globally, democracy still has teething problems. Democracy has teething problems even in those societies which are kind of oldest modern democracies in the world, mostly in the Western part of the world. But in India, can you hear me? Somebody is complaining that. Okay, so in India, the history of democracy is even shorter. As Professor Kumar pointed out, we became independent and a modern republic 75 years ago. And 75 years are not a long time for such epochal changes to take roots in a society which is where the traditions, the customs, and the social mind have layers deposited in the social mind over millennia and over centuries. So it's a democracy to take roots in a society like India was a challenging task to start with. And 75 years are not a long time. Um, um, then the question arises that how did we come to have such, what I will say, such a good constitution? I must explain that in my view, I come from the left part of the political spectrum, and I am not necessarily happy with all aspects of constitution. The constitution has the modern social aspects, which I am happy about. And constitution also has class dimension, with which I will have issues. But this evening, I will not talk about the system or class dimension of the constitution. I am saying that it's a great constitution, one of the best in the world, mostly in terms of what I will call modernity. Modernity means equal citizenship, everybody being equal before the law, and so on. And there may be there are set procedures, constitutional, legal, political procedures to ensure this kind of modernity comes to our society. So that part of the constitution I uphold, and the part that I think will have to be improved upon in future, that I will give in one word. In future there should be a fully socialist constitution. That part, is something that, as I said, is not the topic of this evening, but that is where I had critique of the constitution in past, and I might have critique of this constitution in future. But right now, the threat to democracy that has come, it has come to undoing the modernist part of the constitution. And that is why I think the task is to uphold the constitution and to face up to the challenge that democracy is faced with. That clarity has to be there in all of us. That constitution needs to be defended because it is a modern constitution that gives equal citizenship, that promotes political equality, that also aims at social equality, and that posits rational legal procedures to settle debates and settle controversies, settle conflicts, on the basis of that constitutional legal rationality or logic, and not on the basis of customs and traditions. Again, as I said, there are always limitations to all these things when you try to cultivate, such formal structure in the organic soil of a given society. There are problems and challenges there. We will come to that in some aspects, later. But this is the challenge, and this is why I think I defend the constitution, and defending the constitution has come on the agenda. That is the crux of the challenge that Indian democracy is facing. The other part of this thing is, the reason I say that democracy itself is a threat to democracy, or democratic processes themselves are a threat to democracy, that comes from the other part of democracy, which is the part of popular democratic processes, elections being the most important example. So the people who have brought this challenge in front of Indian democracy, the rulers whose ideology and whose actions have become a threat to democracy, in today's times, they have come to power democratically. I'm not saying that there are no games played there. There are no manipulations and maneuverings there. There are dubious aspects of the democratic processes. It could be money power, it could be muscle power, it could be EVM, whatever you pick and choose. But all those things put together, we cannot argue that the electoral process itself is only manipulation. The present rulers do have political support. they have come to power largely through democratic means. For whatever they have done in order to convince a significant portion of Indian electorate or Indian people, that notwithstanding, finally their coming to power was a result of the popular democratic process. So you see that we have a clear example where the popular democratic process has brought such an ideology and such an political force to power, which then threatens the institutional framework of democracy. That is the crux of the challenge before Indian democracy. That popular democracy has been used, has been roped into, has been deployed to threaten the institutional framework of democracy. Now, you might ask that why am I so convinced about the goodness of the institutional framework of democracy? I indicated that already, that because the democratic values for which we have no alternative, democratic values have come through an epochal change in human history, the change that has led humanity to the modern era, that kind of epochal change has gone into giving rise to these democratic values, and independent of where those values were first born, no one can escape those values. We do not have any better alternative to democracy. Some of us on the Marxist side of political theory, we argue that the only hope is that only replacement of democracy is that eventually state will retreat from the lives of people. But that's a too distant a goal, and that is not very useful for talking while we are talking about day-to-day politics and the challenge to democracy that has come through day-to-day politics. So with that caveat, I will say that there is no alternative to democracy. Everybody has to become, all societies, all civilizations, all countries and their political systems must become democratic, increasingly more democratic, increasingly better, forms of democracy. We do not have an alternative. And that realization, that change, that epochal change to modernity, that is what gets enshrined in democratic constitutions in various ways. So to the extent that these values are enshrined in our constitution, that is why I am sure about the goodness of this constitution, its modernist part, the goodness part of the modernist part of this constitution. And how this came about. The most important development that brought democracy to us was the national struggle itself, the anti-colonial struggle. So the modernity and steps of democracy came to India paradoxically through colonialism. The people who came to rule over us from outside, the people who enslaved us, the people who exploited and plundered us, the people whose imperial empire and capitalist power arose on the resources taken away from our country in a large measure. The paradox of politics is that the same people also opened the door for modernity, opened the door for democracy. So the kind of management, political management that they had, the colonial rule had, that along with the resistance that it gave rise to, or the challenge it gave rise to, namely the anti-colonial struggle, the national struggle, together the dynamics or the dialectics of these two, the colonial rule and its antidote, namely national struggle, the interaction between those two were the beginning of the democratic process in our country, or in a way in our civilization, in the subcontinental civilization. So you can remember the dates, 1909, the communal award was given that the minority Muslims will elect their own representatives, but so there must have been some slight small opening to democracy, because where does the question arise that who will elect whom? So 1909, then 1928, you remember the Congress committee headed by Motilal Nehru that put together ideas about if India becomes independent, what kind of constitution it will have. So the report of 1928 Motilal Nehru Committee report, which has many salient features and elements of what eventually became India's constitution. Then 1935, the Government of India Act, if you compare that with the constitution that was finally written, there is a large overlap, And then, of course, you have independence, 1947, you have 1950 when the constitution is promulgated, and so on. So this whole process, the constitution came out of national struggle. People like Nehru and Ambedkar led it, but the legacy it contained, the values that it enshrined, came from the entire national struggle. In that, I might mention that, of course, Gandhi's leadership and Gandhi's genius played the dominant role. Of course, Gandhi was, without Gandhi, it is hard to imagine how the Indian people would have been deployed or roped into a modern anti-colonial struggle. In fact, Indian history prior to the national struggle has been such that the participation of people in large scale political movements or large scale political processes have been very scant, very rare. Mostly in our society, even comparing with other pre-modern societies, our societies was more so apolitical, or people have been cut off from the political process, and a kind of civilizational mind had been created, which in one of the great saint poets, Tulsidas, he put these words in the mouth of one of the characters in Ramcharitmanas Manthara. Whoever becomes king, what am I going to lose? That was the civilizational mind speaking largely of India. So Gandhi's genius was that he roped such a society and people on a mass scale into a very modern project. The modern project was anti-colonial project. The modern project was project of nationalism. And Gandhi, of course, we can't discuss that in a short time this evening, and I am no expert on Gandhi. There are greater experts on Gandhi in the audience, this evening. But there are. It's a huge subject. Gandhi was a deep thinker, an ideological thinker. And yet he was wise enough. He was political enough not to insist on his ideological views letter by letter to be imposed on the newly emergent India. Otherwise, he would not have given the rope, so to speak, to someone like Jawaharlal Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru, his ideology and his thinking and his grappling of what India is and who Indians are was significantly at variance with understanding of Gandhi. And yet Gandhi did not impose in what I will call his rather utopian views. I am not using the word utopian in a disparaging manner. I am using that in a appreciative manner for an epochal thinker, but he did not insist on his utopian views to be imposed on the newly emergent republic, as long as he was there. So Gandhi's genius was that he was a master of mass mobilization in an era when there were means of communication were very scarce. He managed to mobilize, this country, which had never been mobilized on that subcontinental scale ever before, other than in few examples of empires, but then people were not mobilized into creating empires, Maurya Empire or Gupta Empire or Mughal Empire. Those were the politics from top. People from below were mobilized for the very first time on a subcontinental scale in a large scale political project. And that is why Gandhi is one of the all-time greats of our civilization. Now, the values that got enshrined in the Constitution, there, the modernist leader played the leading role. People like Nehru and people like Ambedkar, they played the role. And that is why modern democratic values got enshrined in the Constitution, which, despite being a leftist, which I uphold. My critique, as I said, of the Constitution is in the class dimension, but that is not, that unfortunately has been pushed on the away from the political table right now. Right now on the political table, the question of modernity is the burning issue, and the challenge to democracy has come in the form of challenge to modernity. Now, okay, so I don't know how much time I have, but let me see. I am halfway through. I think you may be a little bit flexible in terms of time if I overshoot by a few minutes.
Of course, Ravi, don't worry. We are flexible enough because you are discussing a very inflexible problem.
Thank you. So let me just briefly sketch how this crisis arises, how this threat has arisen. The threat that I have said that it is a democratic threat to democracy. How has this arisen? In a very sketchy way, you will see that, a very good constitution comes into effect, when the Constituent Assembly itself is not very democratic. Constituent Assembly is elected not by universal suffrage, by 12 or 13% of the people vote, and they are also the kind of propertied elite or educational elite, whichever way that was decided. 12-13% of the people elected the Constituent Assembly, and that Constituent Assembly was full of people who would not be convinced about the Constitution that finally came about. The debates that happened in the Constituent Assembly are, should be an eye-opener to those people who think that Ambedkar wrote it and Nehru got it passed. It was not as simple. Coming of the Constitution, it was a colossal struggle, debate inside the Constituent Assembly, and lot of traditional, customary, powerful forces and their representatives were there in the the Constituent Assembly who never reconciled eventually to what the Constitution, what kind of Constitution India came up with. Now that happened because democracy was not very intense at that time. That happened because mass mobilization of the national struggle was led by the elite, led by the leaders like Gandhi and Nehru and others, and it was a constant struggle, constant mobilization. People were not raising hands to determine what kind of India after independence they want to have. What kind of India after independence we will have, what kind of constitution, for example, we will have, was a debate in the leadership, was a debate in the elite sections of the society, and that was a major factor in coming up with a good constitution. What I'm saying is may shock you or may be very counterintuitive to you. A very good constitution, a very democratic and modern constitution came about because it did not come out of a truly democratic process. That is point number one. The hegemony of Congress, that was given in the beginning years and couple of decades of after independence. Congress winning elections was a foregone conclusion. Nobody was, really going to be able to successfully challenge Congress. No, you may remember that the principal opposition in the first parliament was CPI, Communist Party of India. No other what in our language we call the bourgeois political parties, none of them were there in a position to make their political presence felt significantly in the parliament. So Congress hegemony was given, and Congress hegemony was characterized by Nehru's leadership, and Nehru being prime minister. Those were the good years, probably the best years of the newly founded republic. That happened because Congress hegemony was there. That happened because Nehru was the supreme leader. That happened because Nehru managed to put together an elite that could project into future an idea of India that will be modern, that will be developed, and that will be legally, constitutionally equal for all Indians. So that I mean, for example, I being a leftist, I was a child, in Nehru years, but my previous generation of leftists, they were constantly criticizing Nehru. They were constantly criticizing the kind of independence India had got. You would remember the famous phrases of progressive poets, "Ye daag daag ujala," and so on. And yet, now we realize, now that we are faced with the threat that we are faced with, we realize that India of Nehru's time, which was much less fed, much less educated, much more pre-modern, much more traditional, feudal, and so on, whichever adjectives you use, that came up with a politics. And during that time, it supported a politics, to the extent that it expressed its political will and political choice that was very good for starting out of a modern republic. When the Congress decline starts, the decline of Congress hegemony starts, and that was a long period. If you want to pick a date, that I will pick 1967, when for the first time many state assemblies, the regional parties won, non-Congress parties won, And if I were to put an end to this date of transition, I will put 1992, when Babri Masjid was demolished. So these, let's say quarter of a century between 1967 and 1992, with several ups and downs, this was a period of transition from Congress hegemony to now Hindutva hegemony. And from 1992 to till today, these 30 years have been, now during this period, Hindutva hegemony has been established, which is the main cause of threat to India's democracy. Now, again, these are very large swaths of history. And when I'm saying that Congress hegemony was declining between 67 and 92, during that period, quote unquote, a powerful leader like Indira Gandhi was there. And also Rajiv Gandhi got the largest number of MPs ever in his parliamentary history of India. So, don't think that it was a straight line decline. It was much more topsy-turvy, up and down. But if you average it out, you can see that Congress decline, the decline of Congress hegemony is more or less complete by 1992. Between 1992 and today, in these 30 years, out of these 30 years also, 15 have been ruled by Congress or Congress-led regimes. And yet, I have no doubt that these, despite 15 years, half of this period being under the Congress rule, um, it is clear to me that that was again the topsy-turvy nature of Indian politics, electoral politics. That was the complications of turning ideological hegemony into electoral political power. There are, the hegemony does not necessarily immediately translate into electoral power or political power. It is the complication of that dynamics that 15 of those years were ruled by Congress, which has lost its hegemony, lost its modernist ideological Nehruvian hegemony. It had lost. So you see, this, when Congress hegemony is on the decline in late 70s, 80s, and 90s, that is the period, in which Indian electoral democracy really becomes competitive. Electoral democracy becomes real, becomes intense. And when competitive democracy comes on the in the Indian political arena, then the competitors for political power, the people who must go to people and convince them by whatever means, it's a all-out electoral war. Whichever wins elections, one must do. That was not the case in Nehru's times. That was not the case mostly, earlier, later, a little later also, when Congress hegemony began to decline. This was more when Congress hegemony had already declined, and the new hegemony was on the emergence but had not established itself, when the conflict was being played out between Mandal and Mandir, if you remember, in late 80s and 90s, when for a while it was thought that, Congress hegemony, the forces that will replace Congress hegemony, they were contending with each other. One possibility was the Mandal politics, and the other possibility was the Mandir politics. Eventually, what happened. Mandir politics has won, and Mandal politics, went into disarray, and also was largely co-opted into the Mandir politics. A large part of it was co-opted into the Mandir politics. So when I'm saying that the Hindutva hegemony arose after, the process has started in 1980s, and Congress itself may have played some role in it. I will come a little later to what roles we all have played into this politics. But my emphasis more is not on what role we have played, what role political agencies have played. My emphasis is more on the social soil, civilizational mind, and the dynamics of electoral politics in such a society where civilizational mind contain deep fault lines. And those fault lines can then be made use of, can be deployed, can be dug out of the civilizational mind into the political arena of political conflict. That is what happened, and when the competitive electoral politics forced the political forces to win elections by hook or crook, by anything goes, then there were no compunctions, there were no hesitations in bringing out of the civilizational mind very troubling fault lines that have been there. The simple secular kind of secular part of the political spectrum, when it says that communalism in India, is just the doing of the communal forces. If communal forces did not, bring it on the political scene, India has lived peacefully, different religions have lived peacefully, and we will not be faced with this, communal fault line becoming a political fault line. That I think is a very simplistic understanding. There have been fault lines in the Indian history and in the Indian civilizational mind. We should be aware of those fault lines so that those fault lines are not deployed into malignant politics, into bad politics. That should not be equated with saying that Indian people have lived peacefully, all religions have lived peacefully all the time, and there is, only political mischief makers, give rise to, starting with the colonial masters. Most of progressive sections, like people like us, put the blame on the colonial masters for creating all kinds of social divisions in India, including the communal and caste divisions, or at least exacerbating it. This whole kind of political attitude needs to be rethought. The civilizational mind does contain fault lines. That does not mean that we make bad use of those fault lines. That just puts the challenge before us that the problem is very deep, and that can be managed only through very enlightened, modernist kind of democracy and politics. And because those fault lines do exist in the civilizational mind, there will be, in the intense competitive electoral democracy, there will be forces. If one force is not there, another force will be there, which will make use of those fault lines. So
Dr. Saab, you may take 15 more minutes.
Okay. So that is in nutshell what has happened. That is how this crisis has arisen. It has arisen through an interplay between malignant political forces which wanted to bring out those fault lines into political play. But also we have to realize that those civilizational cultural fault lines have been there. And that is the reason I am saying that democracy itself has brought this threat to democracy. The democratic process, in a country like our, where civilizational, social, cultural mind does contain fault lines, that has been triggered and activated by competitive electoral democracy, and that is how this crisis has come about. Why am I making these seemingly theoretical, historical kind of points for when we are dealing with day-to-day politics? I'm making this point because these things are not all, these things are very immediate political matters, and clarity has not always been there on these matters. So left parties, other social movements, many people here are from the Gandhian, Lohiyite, Narendra Dev kind of stream of the political spectrum, and other social movements too. We have been accustomed to underlining the importance of popular democracy at the cost of institutional framework of democracy. I, being a leftist for many decades, I remember my own argument that the institutional framework of democracy, the constitution, I have treated most of my political life, in my understanding, as an instrument of class rule, and hence it must be, replaced, in future, through by bringing about a fully socialist constitution. So, and now I have changed my opinion, in the sense that the class nature of constitution remains, and my critique remains, but the modernity part, the part that that we fortunately got through the heritage of world modernity, global modernity, anti-colonial struggle, leadership of Gandhi, Nehru, and others, through the elite that led the national movement, through their endeavors, through their efforts, we got a very good constitution, which is being now undone by unleashing of popular democracy. No matter how paradoxical or how blasphemous it sounds to say, this is the process, and we have not been, all political forces have not been clear about this this large wave of change in modern Indian politics. That is why the kind of what I would say, forgive my words, but I'm looking for a better, more civil word, but in the kind of pathological opposition to modernity, which translate into a kind of perennial anti-congressism, which blames, from our side of left as well as from the side of many social movement, complaining about, Nehru and his period and his ideology and his pink socialism, and his starry-eyed, framework for democracy, all that the critique that we had, we have to reevaluate, we have to go back and rethink that so that we can be clear about the tasks today. When you compare, when you say, compare Nehru's periods today, today is the reverse. Today, the, the, the popular mind, the way it exists, is being led in the wrong direction in order for Hindutva hegemony to turn into political hegemony. That is what has happened. And if you say that, oh, we have been lazy, if we go to people, people will listen to us more than they will listen to RSS or to Hindutva, that is too simplistic an understanding. There are challenges. Those of us who know what Indian countryside is like, or even what Indian cities are like, we know it is not that easy. When you go there and you are confronted with RSS, you are confronted with Hindutva hegemony, it is not that you can easily win the people over. So that is the challenge. And because this clarity is not there, we are having problem in articulating the strategy for defeating this malignant hegemony that is challenging Indian democracy, and that is coming up as a crisis to Indian democracy. So if just to conclude, I will say 2 points. In the short run, of course, you can't do anything about the civilizational mind. That takes centuries to change. And the most effective way to make changes into the civilizational mind is politics. So we are back to square one. We have to do politics in such a way that whatever barriers to modernity in the social arena are there, that can be, those barriers can be can be challenged or can be overcome. So I'm not going to, I know I'm running out of time. So I'm not going to the details of how the all opposition forces should unite, and how Congress will play the central role, especially Rahul's Congress, which fortunately now people are paying attention to after Bharat Jodo Yatra, that will be the center around which opposition forces have to unite. Those are strategies to be worked out by political parties, and I am not part of political parties. So that is my hope. I do not have a simple solution to how to come up with that kind of a strategy for 2024. But one thing in the long run, I am clear that the task is to be seen in terms of safeguarding the institutional framework of democracy and acting in the, trying to intervene in the political processes of democracy in such a way that all forces, after all, Hindutva does not win majority vote in India, So the majority vote is still maybe fragmented, and that is why they win. So the modernity has struck roots in India. But the clarity about modernity is not there in left circles as well as in the social movement circle. That clarity has to come. And that as I say as a leftist, that in the system domain, in the economic system domain, socialism is my slogan. In the social domain, in the cultural domain, in the civilizational domain, modernity is my slogan. And modernity, unfortunately, has been turned into a bad word by intellectuals as well as people on the left and in the social movement. I will appeal for rethinking on that count. I will say that I keep telling my own comrades in the left that get off these, a left walks on 2 legs of dogma and populism, get off both these legs and grow new legs. Those legs will be legs of future socialism and the other leg of modernity. And I don't have time to go into asking the question that those people who thought that leftists made a mistake by putting all the eggs in the class basket, those movements, what happened to them? Why they are equally in trouble when faced with Hindutva? What happened to other streams of the political spectrum? And what happened to the social movement, including the Dalit movement, feminist movement, and all that? Why have they failed equally as left has failed, and why this situation has arisen. I did not get time to see our role, the role left has played, the role other opposition has played in facilitating, unwittingly facilitating the emergence of Hindutva. We all have our share of blames. We all have played role in creating this situation. So that must be thought in a wise and thoughtful way, and we must unite on a long-term project of intervening in the Indian social mind through modern politics in such a way that modernity becomes better entrenched, so that it cannot be challenged by forces like the Hindutva. I will stop there, and most of the things I could not say hopefully will come in the discussion.
Thank you so much, Professor Ravi Sinha. You have talked about the need to be committed to two frameworks which are two sides of the same coin. The idea of modernity in our daily life, in our civilizational discourses, and the dream of socialism in the political and economic system. You have also invited us to attack you by asking very clearly that left has failed, but Dalit movement, women movement, and many other movements, which were byproduct of the Nehruvian discourse of democratization and decolonization, are today nearly as helpless as the left. So, bal mujhe maar. You are a bold thinker, and I'm happy. So I request Shri Randir Kumar Gautam to conduct the question answer session. For the participants, I want to request, this is a rare chance of an open-minded leftist. So please don't miss it and give yourself a little more time. It is 2028, and we propose to have the discussion till 9 o'clock, and we let Ravi Sinha go home with a lot of questions and lot of problematic propositions. Randir Gautam ji, please.
Thank you so much, sir. And it was really a very excellent presentation with a very sound theoretical orientation, very sound theoretical conceptualization as well. So I request a respected participant to raise his or her hand, or you can also write question in the chat box. So I can see one hand, Satinath ji. So please unmute yourself and try to be brief as you can. So Satinath ji, please. And then Subrata.
I would very much appreciate if Vijayji could again define modernity in a few words, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Bhai, it will be nice if you introduce yourself, because you are also a campaigner and you are also a very optimist, engaged Democrat. Please introduce yourself, Satinath Chaudhary ji.
Well, my name is Satinath Chaudhary. I'm right now living in New York, but I try to keep abreast with happenings in India, and I'm a strong protagonist of proportional representation system of election, and actually there is a way we can get to that, and there are many things. I'll be sharing some things and that I have written very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. I request Dr. Ravi Sinha ji, please note down these queries or question, and I will invite you to.
Yeah, I could not clearly hear the question. Is it about saying, clarifying what I mean by modernity? Was that the question?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yes. Okay.
Yes,
so,
yes.
I mean, I know that modernity is a very large word and very.
Ravi bhai, it was suggested that please collect these questions And then you have a good 10 to 20 minutes for explaining them one by
Oh,
one.
okay. Okay, go ahead.
So
Go ahead.
there are
sir.
some more questions waiting. Yeah.
Yes.
The next question, please. The next question.
Subrata Sarangi. Subrata Sarangi, please unmute yourself and ask the question. She's taking some time. Professor Meera Chakravarti. Alok Tandon ji. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. We-
Can you hear him? I can't hear him.
No.
आलोक जी,
Can you
आपकी
hear me?
आवाज नहीं आ रही है,
Ravi
आवाज टूट रही है। आप
is
इसको
not
चैट बॉक्स में लिख दें अपने क्वेश्चन तो बहुत अच्छा रहेगा।
saying for the
श्री
last
आलोक जी,
few
your voice is getting
years.
broken because of
You can
technical
hear me?
problem. So I suggest that you put your
Okay.
question in the chat box. Please put your question in the chat box. Alok
I
Tandon.
agree with him that the of communal consciousness. Can you hear me? Okay.
Now it's better. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
आप बोलिए, आपकी आवाज जब ठीक है।
okay. The first point is Dr. Sinha is in democracy in India, of course, is to take for granted the moment we say democracy, we take for granted because is that so? No. So right now, so what I want to ask is that why have done that renegotiation, tried to renegotiate, and we were disappointed with the left. I have been in the socialist. So what we have failed is that we have experienced. That's very disappointing. So why haven't they, even within the Congress, why haven't they've been renegotiating if democracy is a space for renegotiation? Thank you. Thank you, Randy.
Meera ji, please repeat your question because your voice was breaking. Meera ji, please
Okay.
repeat your question in one sentence.
Okay, I said that when you take the term, when you utter the word democracy, we take that democracy is for all, which is very misnomer, because we are experiencing from a long time the corporate democracy and not people's democracy. And we in the women's movement, as well as in the socialist movement, have tried to renegotiate. But I wonder why the left party, as well as the young Turks in the Congress itself, did not negotiate, despite the fact that democracy is a place of renegotiation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Sarangi
Okay,
Saab, please ask.
this is yes. Good evening, all. Good evening, Dr. Ravi. I am Subrata Sarangi. I teach physics at Bhubaneswar. I have had the opportunity to work with Dr. Ravi when he was in Ahmedabad. I was doing my PhD there. Anyway, it is so nice. Yeah. So my question is the following. Actually, I had two questions. One is similar to what Satinath asked. What will be some of the points or some of the hallmarks of modernity by which we will know that okay, these are the components of modernity, or how do we recognize, or what will be the types of movements, activities which we will have under modernity? And the second thing is perhaps little more theoretical, or maybe coming from cultural, from the left. Are we? So when we say we were learning about cultural revolution in China, that also happened in the realm of culture. So are we saying that modernity is something which we are again perhaps another type of cultural revolution which will happen again in the superstructure and in the culture? Is that will it be correct to say like second question? Thank you.
Thank you, Subraji. Dr. Ravi Sinha, there is this question of Sri Alok Tandon. Why modernity could not take root in Indian mind despite a modernist political movement against colonialism? Thank you, Alokji. Randhir, please take another question.
Please,
Good evening to all. I am Vilas Kirote from Pune. I am a volunteer of Rashtra Seva Dal, a socialist movement from Pune. Sir, we all know in the independent struggle also, to some extent, all these fundamental people were participated. And after the independence also, these people were very much known to the Congress, to the communist and to the socialist. Even after that, till today, by directly or indirectly, knowingly or unknowingly, some people have helped them. And even though knowing their ideology, how this ideology has become a very big threat to our India and to our democracy and to all our constitution. Why this has happened? Even though the Congress, communist, socialists, knowing that this ideology is very dangerous to the Indian nation and to the Indian society, still it has become a very big threat. Why and how? Thank you.
Dr. Gyan Giloi from Italy, please. Dr. Gyan Giloi from Italy.
Yes, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I am not visible because I have some problems. Can you hear me? Because
Yes.
I can hear you.
Yeah,
Well,
your voice is clear, Gyan. Please go
thank you very much. Well, it was so rich and so interesting, and I must admit there are many things which I completely ignored. I would like perhaps to ask a question that is, I understand the crisis of hegemony, of political hegemony of the Congress Party. I was wondering, was perhaps this has been said during the exposition, and I lost it. I apologize. But well, what I was wondering about is this crisis of political hegemony was preceded by a crisis in the cultural hegemony of the Democratic of the Congress Party. It is there were roots which brought about this crisis in the so to speak in the cultural environment of India, or at least of some states of India. And if it was so, that is, if there was a cultural decline and the cultural crisis of the Congress Party, why did it came about? I was wondering about this point, because so also in the sense in which, for instance, cultural hegemony is interpreted in the left tradition by Antonio Gramsci, for instance. That is, this I mean. Thank you very much. It was really very, very, very brilliant, very interesting, and very rich. Thank you.
Dr. Sipra Sagarika. Dr. Sipra Sagarika's question, please, from Orissa.
Good evening, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
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 Sir, first of all, I would like to congratulate for this wonderful perception regarding democracy, because it is very rare to get such deep understanding about concept and practical implications of democracy and real problems in India. I was actually keen to know about the politics of gallantry awards, because recently there is a news regarding how there is a probability of a fixation of gallantry awards which were given during the Congress period. Because when we talk about democracy, the entire understanding of awards and the recognitions are a very important part to play. Because it depends on what intensity of contribution a person from interdisciplinary field has contributed to the society. So if you can reflect on how the politics of awards are going during the period of Congress, and what are its continuous feedback from other political parties, that would definitely add to our understanding of democracy. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sipra. Now, Prachi ji, put your question, followed by a question from Sri Raghu Kumar from Hyderabad. Ms. Prachi. You are muted, Prachi ji. Please unmute yourself.
I did not raise my hand. I didn't have a question.
Okay,
Sorry.
no problem. Minati, Dr. Minati, please.
Hello, thank you, sir. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. First, I'd like to thank Professor Ravi Sinha for his very enlightening presentation. We had a lot of light to the subject, but this is you can take as a sub question. Like there are so many challenges to our democracy, and I feel there are also some sub challenges like red tapeism, rampant corruption, slackening of the advancement, maybe exploitation of the minorities, and the gender issues. There are so many, and the internal democracy of the party, the dynamics of dynastic rule things. But how do you view the separatist movement, whether it is a challenge to democracy? If so, how it can be tackled? Thank you.
Yes, Raghu Kumar from Hyderabad.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. While thanking Ravi Sinha ji for a wonderful talk today, I would like to make one or two few observations. One thing is, the European context of democracy and the Asiatic and African experience of democracy are two different things. Especially people like Gandhi, Lohia, they found that you cannot ignore religion in Indian, in Asiatic context, basically. So if that is the case, there are, you see, within the religion, Lohia was regularly saying one thing, that within each religion, there is always a continuous struggle between liberal forces and conservatives. So when we treat the entire religion as a single block and just ignore its significance in the social fabric or democracy, formation of democratic societies, and even the project of modernity, I think, because I too go along with you, taking a stand that I belong to the left of the center, and I believe in all these areas along with you. But until and unless a serious re-investigation is made into what is religion and how, because earlier we were concentrating on class, then we understood that because of the interventions of Ambedkar and Lohia, we now understood the significance of caste. Then another aspect of Indian society or even Asiatic societies is the religion. And can we continue to ignore for another 3-4 decades and then realize that we have done a mistake in this area also? So what I would like to request is, how do you investigate? How do you relocate religion in democratic process? And until unless that liberal forces are given a space in the democratic functioning and segregate the so-called conservative fundamentalist forces, probably in a democracy like India, we may not be in a position to challenge them. This is my understanding. Thank you.
Marji, now request Sri Sugyan Modi from Noida. Sugyan Modi ji, to be followed by Alok Vajpayee and then Vinay Bharadwaj. Sri Sugyan Modi ji, namaskar.
नमस्कार साहब, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। प्रति शुक्रवार को मैं सुनता हूँ और बड़ा अच्छा लगता है। आज की चर्चा में रवि सिन्हा जी से जो जानकारी मिली, मुझे बड़ी प्रसन्नता हुई। मैं आपको, आनंद कुमार जी को और रणधीर कुमार जी और सभी को इस बात के लिए बधाई देता हूँ। धन्यवाद।
विनय भारद्वाज, विनय भारद्वाज जी प्लीज।
Am I audible?
Yes, please. Yes.
It was definitely a very stimulating session, and I congratulate all of you for organizing this. I want to ask the speaker, in the context of what we read today in the newspaper about the state of Indian democracy and the civilization mind of Indian society, about which the speaker spoke, Yogi Adityanath has ordered district magistrates to ensure a proper celebration of Navratra, and he has allocated 1 lakh each to every district magistrate and has ordered that please ensure that women and children are taking part in organizing various rituals during this Navratra festival, and to ensure that it is done in a proper way with all the rituals and whatever and traditional practices that go with the Navratra. Now, if Indian mind in pre-Indian society was apolitical, always apolitical, and there was no participation in the political processes in the pre-modern India, and given that the Constituent Assembly brought in a modern constitution, which is one of the best in India, then how do we resolve this constant tension between modern and pre-modern, modern and anti-modern, and what in the iterations, the assertions of Narendra Modi keeps coming out every day in the public arena? Is it because the ideological differences were never discussed, the ideological battles remained silent, the battles were never raised, they were never started, and ideological differences were left unresolved and unaddressed? Is this the fault of Indian democratic procedure or system, or those who were aspiring to be in power through democratic procedures?
Thank you, Professor Vinay Bharadwaj. Thank you very much. Sri Niranjan Pant, you have put a very serious question in the chat box. Would you like to say it, Sri Niranjan Pant? Sri Niranjan Pant.
I have
Yes.
written
Only.
the questions. I have said you want me to read out the questions?
Please read out, Niranjan Bhai.
The first was more of an observation, but anyway, I would read it out. गांधीवाद सर्वोदय पर आधारित है जो व्यक्तिपरक है, जबकि समाजवाद तथाकथित समाजपरक। इस संदर्भ में क्या गांधीवाद और समाजवाद परस्पर विरोधाभासी नहीं है, और इस विरोधाभास को संवाद की प्रायोजक संस्था किस तरह सुलझाती है? भारत में समाजवादी दलगत राजनीति का उत्थान और पतन भी इसी संदर्भ में प्रासंगिक है। और दूसरा सवाल है जो कि नेहरू जी के बारे में कुछ कहा गया रवि जी ने, तो जयप्रकाश ने नेहरू को 1957 के आसपास दलगत राजनीति छोड़कर समाज कार्य का नेतृत्व करने का निमंत्रण दिया था। नेहरू के तमाम गुणों के बावजूद उनका 17 वर्षों तक मृत्यु पर्यंत सत्तासीन रहना क्या जनतंत्र के आज जैसे अवसान का कारण नहीं है, जो अब एक अधिनायक तंत्रशाही हो गया है?
Is there anybody else to ask a question? Most welcome. Otherwise, I ask a small question and then we give Shri Ravi Sinha his at least 15 minutes, because there are questions all the way from America, Italy, Noida, Hyderabad, everywhere. So anybody to ask a question? Last chance. Yes, Vinu Devi ji, please ask your question. Vinu Devi ji.
Yeah, good evening, sir.
Good evening.
It's really indeed a very informative session. And I would like to thanks to Professor Ravi Sinha. Actually, I really like the concept of modernity in our daily life along with the socialism act. We are allowing the modernity not at the cost of socialism. But my question is that sir told us that the civilization minds can't be changed so easily. So being a youth, because we are the creator of the democracy and we are following these things in our upcoming life. So my question is that how we can change this civilization minds which are deep rooted in the Indian democracy. If I'm the one of them, if I will change myself, I will change my family, I will change my society. So what are the possible things so that we can change that civilized minds which are deep rooted in the Indian democracy? Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any question? Okay. I put a small question which has some implications. Dr. Ravi Sinha, you very clearly suggested that there was a discourse of change between 1967 and 1992 within the larger banner of non-Congressism, which ended with demolition of Babri Masjid and rise of Hindutva hegemony. My feeling was that within 1967 and 1992, that period of non-Congressism created 5 children. Of course, one of them was Hindutva politics of RSS, but there were 4 more children. One was this Mandal politics of caste-oriented rise of the middle caste and their claim for social justice leading to Mandal reservations. Say third child was non-Congressism leading to left front politics in the country, resulting into continuous governance of West Bengal and most of the time of Kerala by a left front led by CPM. Fourth child was Naxalism. Maoism was born between 1967 and was important in the discourse of the country, created a self-criticism of the left politics, and of course created an environment of enlightenment and sacrifice. And the fifth child, most surprisingly, was radicalization of Congress itself, because Congress got split in 69 and then created an opportunity for the left front and the socialists to join central government by supporting minority government of Indira Gandhi, leading to Garibi Hatao politics of 1971, of course, collapsing into emergency in 74, 75, and then a new trajectory of Congress with Indira Gandhi leading Shri Rajiv Gandhi, and then Rajiv Gandhi leading the country towards neoliberal politics of LPG policies between 84 and 89. So there were 5 children. You focus on the eldest child. And what about the other 4 children? Thank you very much.
Well, if I think we could sit whole night, the kind of very deep and good questions that have come about, and there is no way, even if I had the whole night, I don't have answer to all the questions. but still they are good questions, and that force us to think.
Well, you are leading us to invite you for another session in very near future. We need you very badly because you are an open-minded person.
I am just expressing my inability to be able to do justice to the questions, generally, but also because of the time constraint. So I don't know whether I can answer each question or not. So let me just go by some conceptual order, and I apologize to those people in the audience whose questions I am not able to tackle given the time constraint. I will start with the modernity because that is central to the argument I am making. And modernity, I use in a very specific way, in a very old-fashioned way, because in the intellectual circles, a lot of debate has happened about modernity in last 50 years or 100 years, and modernity is no longer an uncontested or acceptable, easily acceptable concept, in most of the intellectual circles. I use it in a very pragmatic way. I am no philosopher. I am a political activist, and I use it in a very pragmatic way. By modernity, I mean the two things. It walks on two legs. One is the leg of reason or rationality, and the other is the leg of freedom, which in the final analysis must be freedom of the individual. And this I am saying while I am a Marxist, because I believe that in our circles, the freedom question has been often misunderstood. Marx understood it very well. And even in a book like Capital, in the first volume, in the last pages, he makes it clear enough that finally it will be the freedom of the individual. Anyway, so this is the, and this thing of rationality and freedom, the modernity has been often understood as an ideology of West, ideology of capitalism, ideology of imperialism. So modernity is equated with capitalism and imperialism. It is seen as an ideological weapon of the West, to rule over the world. And those things, I think we will have to go back and rethink. I take modernity separate from capitalism. Modernity was being born in the same region of the world where capitalism was born later, but modernity, the process of birth of modernity had started earlier, much earlier than capitalism became dominant and kind of gave employment to modernity in its imperialist project. That came much later. That came in 18th, 19th century. And modernity was being born starting with 14th, 15th century. It just so happened that that too also happened in Europe. So modernity is a project, which, if those of you who know, it is something like the people have talked about axial age in from 8th century BC to 2nd century BC, in which in many parts of the world, civilizations arose and the big religions, the great religions arose, and that was known as the axial transformation. Modernity is almost like a second axial transformation. Axial age was coined by a philosopher, Jaspers, Karl Jaspers, who thought that the humanity made a big leap in those 500 years in the middle of first millennium before Christ. Even a bigger change happened from 15th century onwards in Europe, in which modernity came about, and religious theological debates and struggles, religious political struggles gave rise to, through a lot of bloodshed and through a lot of controversy, it gave rise to modern philosophy and eventually modern science. That I separate, that I don't see as a design of capitalism, that it came with modernity in order to enslave rest of the world. That kind of simplistic understanding I don't have. I think that the birth of modernity, whatever be its reasons and causes, we don't have time to go into that. That's a huge subject. Whatever may be the origins, modernity arose independent of capitalism. Even though it got hooked with capitalism as capitalism became dominant force. So modernity I see in that epochal sense, in the sense of a large turn. It is not a change from one mode of production to another, one economic system to another, one political order to another. Modernity is a civilizational change, and these two are the main elements, which is equality of all humans leading to freedom of individual, and rationality, namely being free, humanity becoming adult, coming on its own, freeing itself from the guardianship of extra human forces. Those two things I take at modernity. And that is like the earlier axial age. This is a change which no one can avoid. We are still sitting in the middle of that change, and the whole world has to go through that change. And the death of modernity and emergence of postmodern era is too premature. Is too premature. The modernity has not struck roots in the humanity even now very well. So we are part of that struggle, and all the challenges that we face in any society where civilizational mind militates against this new intervention of modernity in the culture and civilization of a land. These are not peculiar only to India. In India, it may be more exacerbated because modernity is even newer in India, and Indian civilization is an ancient civilization, is one of the glorious civilizations right from the axial age, right from the pre-Christian era. So there are thick and deep layers in the civilizational mind of India, and the intervention of modernity in something like an Indian civilization or Indian society will be a long drawn process. So many of the detailed questions that you have asked about why do we face this problem, you see the way I conceptualize, for my pragmatic practical reasons, the way I conceptualize modernity, problems are inherent in that itself. So all the other questions about what could we have done so that this kind of reversal did not take place, this I take as a reversal. The nationalist movement and anti-colonial movement and emergence of Gandhi and Nehru and Ambedkar and so on, that was the step forward. That was opening the door for modernity to the Indian civilization. And now what is happening is a step back, is a reversal. And this reversal also is not uncommon. It has happened in many, many third world countries where independence from colonialism has come under the leadership of very enlightened modern political forces. And after few decades, when democracy unfolds itself in those societies, then regressive or communal or backward forces, come into domination. That has happened now in India, but earlier it has happened in many countries, in Ireland, Algeria, Israel, many, many countries, in different ways. The stories are different, but the essence is same, that freedom is brought forth by enlightened modernist forces. And after half a century or so, or after few decades, when democracy becomes operational, non-modern forces come to the fore because the layers in the civilizational mind are too thick and too heavy to be easily displaced. So it will be a continual fight for a very long time to come. I hope some of the questions have been covered in that. Again, time does not permit me to take questions one by one, but let me take the question that relates to this very big millennial picture that I have brought. Modernity is a millennial change. System change are changes happen over a century, but the kind of civilizational change happens through millennia, through several centuries. Modernity I put in that category. Now, what happens? Why do pre-modern forces or communal forces or regressive forces utilize democracy to undo the hard work of enlightened modernist forces. Why does that happen? That is what I meant when I was saying that democracy is being undone by democracy. And this is a very common phenomenon, not much discussed. I mean, I know of only, not that I have read everything, but I know of, in my looking around, I know of 2 or 3 big scholars who talk about it. One Princeton philosopher, one Marxist. I mean, I keep forgetting the names, but I will not go into those details. They have pointed out how this reversal is a very common phenomena in many of the third world countries. So one thing is, I am optimistic that there will be several waves of these struggles. The good thing is, or the fortunate thing is, that these communal forces, these regressive forces, which make use of the fault lines that remain in the civilizational mind, they do not have a long-range vision. Even if they succeeded, my understanding is that they will fall on their face. In case of India, the plan is, right now there is mass mobilization on the part of Hindutva hegemony, but mass mobilization is not their long-term strategy. This philosophy of Hindutva, the long-term strategy is to depoliticize the masses. The mass mobilization is only to defeat the enlightened forces, defeat the democratic forces, defeat the progressive forces. So they are aligning the masses to defeat, the modernist progressive project, so to speak. But if they become stable, if their hegemony becomes long-lasting, the goal will be that the masses will be depoliticized. They will be again delinked from politics, and the politics will be the hegemony of the new elite. That new elite will be a combination of capital, and some traditional political forces. I am just speaking symbolically. I don't have time to go into the detail, but that, in my understanding, in the long run is not feasible. So even if they are not defeated in the near in the coming elections, 24, 29 or whatever, and even if, as they claim, they are going to be there for a long time, for 50 years, and they will celebrate the 100 years of Indian independence in 2047, when RSS claims that RSS will not be needed because whole of India will become RSS. Everybody will think like RSS. Even if they succeed, they don't have a vision for dealing with a modern era, the global modernity, and the material prosperity. They don't have, their ideology, their hegemony succeeds only by keeping people down, having all the wealth in selected hands, all the political power in the political hegemons, and everybody else, knowing his or her place in the society, which is, being cut off from political arena. That is, as I understand, is their long-term ideology. That is the kind of image false, and that is not sustainable. So that, you can say that this is wishful thinking, but as I said, the crisis is now. We have to fight. We have to fight for 2024. We have to fight for 2029. We have to fight every day. I am not thinking that, oh, let them stay long, they will fall on their face. So I am not saying that just become inactive and don't fight. If they become stable, that will be a far greater disaster for India than it is now. But I am saying that the question of modernity, is that kind of civilizational epochal question. It is not a question of Western tool or imperialist tool or capitalist tool, and that we will have our own separate way out to the future. Some question came about that, by modernity, I don't mean the physical modernity as it exists in West. where it was born. I know I am talking of essence of modernity. That essence, in my belief, no matter how unfashionable the word is, that essence is universal. That universal idea will be cultivated in every soil, and the harvest will be different. So there is not going to be, we are not going to ape or imitate West. Our soil is different. This soil has been deposited in several thousand years. Modernity is a new idea. No one can escape the modernist change. And when this seed of modernity comes to our soil, the harvest that will be there will be very different from the harvest in Europe. This is the kind of understanding we should have. And that relates to the question of that was raised about, for example, Gandhi and Lohia and others, that they realize that Indian civilization is different and that a kind of aping of West will not do, even though I don't know who was aping West. Most of the thoughtful leaders, nobody really was aping West in India. Nehru, for example, who is being blamed for everything these days, he had the deepest and most complex grappling with what India is. Who is Bharat Mata? What does it mean to be Indian? I don't think from my camp, from leftist camp, that kind of grappling has been done about what India is, what is Indian culture and what is Indian soil. And that kind of grappling has not been done even by, in some ways, allow me to say that, even in some ways by Gandhi and Lohia, the way Nehru was grappling with it. That was the best example of grappling with the idea of India that I have come across, and I hold to be the deepest. Why I am bringing Gandhi and others, including Lohia, there is always, you have to strike a balance between what exists and what is the future, what is desirable. If you are putting too much weight on what exists, if you say that Indian civilization and Indian cultural mind is so heavy that recognize that it is religious, recognize that it is caste-ridden, recognize that its cultural civilizational makeup is very old. If you put main emphasis on that, to adjusting to the soil, then one kind of political philosophy will come out. That is the political philosophy that comes out of Gandhi and Lohia and others. Gandhi was singular. Gandhi had the wisdom to realize that even though he had a separate philosophy, he gave the reins to Nehru, knowing who Nehru was and what his idea of future was. Whatever, I don't have a way to read Gandhi's mind. Why did he do that? Why did not he? He could have given reins to anybody. He was that kind of, he had that kind of acceptability. In his own word, he was the dictator of the Congress, and he did not need a post, to dictate, his views on Congress and on rest of India. He was very aware of his powers, and yet he gave the reins to Nehru. He had that wisdom. I don't think that Jayaprakash and Lohia and others had that wisdom. And I don't think that they understood the grappling of Nehru, that how to bring modernity and sow it in the soil, Indian soil. For that, what a scope is there. There is no one like Nehru, neither on left nor on the Indian socialism like Lohia and Jayaprakash, who understood the challenge as well as Nehru did. So that, that answers many of the questions that you have raised, many people have raised, about what could have been done by Congress differently or by others differently. That again, it's a long story. I don't have time. I don't want to hold you up, even though I am willing to sit down, but I don't want to hold you up, rest of the night. That's a long story. As I said very symbolically, that when we evaluate our own doings, when the way we opposed Congress, we on the left opposed Congress, the way we even lately, the way we stopped Jyoti Basu from becoming prime minister, the way we walked out of UPA, on the nuclear deal, all those things should be opened by left and see that what role those steps have played in paving the way, ground for Hindutva. We all have been accomplice, unknowing unwittingly, but we have been, all have been accomplices in paving the ground for Hindutva to arise. So I mean, that's a very long story and very controversial story. I would leave it at that. The 5 children that Professor Kumar has talked about, again, I recognize, you put it beautifully. Yes, those were the 5 children. If we count it right, maybe somebody will come up with some other stepchildren too. But yes, those 5 children were there, and that is the question I'm asking. That yes, one was Hindutva, but the others have to answer this question, that in whatever way we operated, how did each step, now with hindsight, and hindsight is, as they say, always 2020, you can always see back very clearly. Whatever we did in opposing emergency, which must have been opposed, in coming up with Janta strategy under Jayaprakash Narayan, which was done, in coming up with the Mandal to contest Mandir so that Congress hegemony is replaced by relatively progressive force, which speaks for, quote unquote, lower or depressed castes and classes. How did it happen that all the other children, even though they contested with the eldest children, ended up strengthening the eldest child, namely Hindutva? That is again a very long and controversial story, but I have no doubt that we have all helped Hindutva grow, as I said earlier, and that we should clearly see that in my mind, it is clear that is because we did not pay attention to this modernity dimension. People like Jayaprakash and Lohia and others, were not very strong votaries of modernity. They believed too much in the Indian soil. So that way they became conservative, socially, culturally conservative. And people on the left who should have been modernist, they did not pay attention to modernity at all, because they thought either that modernity was a colonial project or capitalist project, or they thought that whatever happens, as Subrat was mentioning that, Subrat Sarangi was mentioning that whatever happened in the sphere of modernity, that is superstructural. Namely, that is in the final analysis determined by the material basis of the society. So we don't have to worry too much independently about what is to be done in the chapter of modernity, because the chapter of system, chapter of material foundation, chapter of production relation, that will take care of modernity. If we succeed in the class struggle, then the superstructure will be fashioned accordingly. This kind of base superstructure, crude model of base superstructure, has been our undoing. We forget even what Marx said. Marx said that the memories of dead generations weigh heavy on the living generations. Marx was not oblivious to the active role of the civilizational mind in day-to-day politics and in class struggle. But as they say, Buddha once Kabir ka upja poot kamal, we all leftists, do not deserve Marx. The way we have operated. He had the insight. We failed to develop that insight. Modernity, what we threw away as superstructure, practically threw away. We thought that, we did not answer even the simple question that religion has been there for all the millennia that we know. Caste in India has been there for all the millennia that we know. How can religion and caste be seen simply as something emanating from the real fire, which is class, and everything else is dhua, everything else comes out of that, the religious structure, the caste structure, the gender structure, many other social structures, what I call social materiality, have lived across many, many modes of production, many, many class systems. So class system and modes of production are as real as rest of society that contains religion, that contains caste, that contains other social materiality. So we have to rework our theoretical understanding, and then we will be able to pay required attention to the question of modernity, and then we will be able to understand which are the political forces which will play the central role now, and which will be the political forces which will play the central role in distant future. Right now, in the struggle for modernity, the forces which are best placed are the enlightened bourgeois forces like Rahul's Congress, not the Congress as a whole. Congress is, everyone knows Congress is not an ideological party, has never been even a party. Half of Congress can walk over to RSS without batting an eyelid. And that has happened, and that keeps happening. But for the first time, we see some inkling that someone in Congress is trying to turn into Congress into an ideological party. And that is a colossal task, and maybe Nehru's capability, if Nehru was around today, he would do it better. But his great grandson, I mean, many people mention dynasty politics. I don't pay attention to any dynasty politics. I don't see dynasty forcing itself upon Congress. Congress has needed the dynasty, and without, this kind of elite and this kind of leadership, no matter all their drawbacks apart, they have been needed. They were needed by Congress and to some extent by Indian polity. So I don't pay attention to this word that gets thrown around. There are all political forces are dynastic in India, and that tells something about India. That tells something about our society, not those dynasts. Anyway, Rahul is trying to turn Congress into a party and into an ideological party. Whether he will succeed or not is an open question. We will see, but it is an epochal struggle, and that will be the center around which left and other left of center forces will have to unite in order to have a chance at defeating these people before, as they claim, they become whole of India, before RSS supposedly dismantles itself in 2047, because in 2047 whole of India will become RSS. That is what they say. So in order for that not to happen, we have to fight, and this will have to be done with modernity question being kept at the center. So I don't know how to answer the detailed questions, because of the time and because I have to go question by question, but I hope that you get the thrust of my argument, from which wherever I have answered to your very good questions, many questions I don't have answered to, but wherever I have answered to, I think I have answered to the questions you have asked. The thrust of the answer you can get from what I am saying. I am sorry if I cannot answer each of the question in question by question.
Thank you, Ravi Sinha. You have invited us for furthering this understanding. If I were around Noida, I would have walked up to your house for a cup of coffee and a night of further interaction.
You are most welcome. You are most welcome.
Yeah, because we are a global audience and we need your next session, maybe within a month, to go for Ravi Sinha too. I have 3 propositions as chair of the session for your consideration and consideration of the participants. First is the delinking which took place between socialism and democracy when the arrival of Tina took place. Tina means there is no alternative. This was no name of a woman, but this idea attracted everybody from left to right, and they got married uninvited, led by Dr. Manmohan Singh, followed by Buddhadev Basu, approved by Lalu Yadav, Mulayam Singh Yadav, Shivraj Chauhan, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and now Narendra Modi. Delinking of democracy and socialism was separating our journey from the quest for modernity initiated by Indian national movement and promoted by people like Nehru, Subhash Bose, Bhagat Singh, Nambudripad, Lohia, Jayaprakash, and many others. That's one proposition. Second is that politics of national movement also had an agenda called decolonization. Decolonization led to identity politics, which included resurrecting our languages, our community identities, our icons of religious groups. And this decolonization created space for Hindu politics, Sikh politics. Remember, the idea of Hindutva was preceded by Khalistan movement. was preceded by Assam movement, was preceded by Dravid and many other nationalist, sub-nationalist forces, which created tension between Bengalis and Assamese, Bengalis and Orias, Tamilians and non-Tamilians, etc. So decolonization, creating a space, legitimate space for communal politics. And third, the failures or the missed opportunities during the first 15 years of freedom, like universalizing education. If India had become a home of literate millions and millions, they would not have drifted away from modernity. They would have created a society with gender justice, a society which was aggressive about casteism and untouchability, a society was non-compromising about communalism and what you call sectarian things. So these are three things. One goes in the account of Nehru and Patel and Azad and Pant and all others who led the country for the first 15 years with Congress hegemony. The other two questions are about democracy, as you rightly said. There is this pressure of dominant caste, and dominant caste has kidnapped, like Raman kidnapped Sita, dominant caste has kidnapped the idea of democracy, and they are able to manage vote. Now these dominant castes are very well stitched together. BJP. BJP is not only, as you rightly said, there is a lot of non-RSS contribution. Like a river has many tributaries. Recently, it happened in Madhya Pradesh, where a large section nursed by Congress became tributary to Congress under Shri Jyotiraditya Scindia. Earlier, a large section nursed by socialists, led by Shri Ramvilas Paswan, or by Ambedkarites, led by this minister who is there from the Dalit Panther background. Nearly 1/3 of the parliament members of the present BJP are not born within the field of RSS. They are born outside RSS. Congress, Socialist, Ambedkarite, Marxist, and many others. The other thing for your consideration is this contrast between the Leninist slogan and our experience. Lenin said 1 step backward for 2 steps forward. We have taken 1 step forward and now we are going 2 steps backward. But unfortunately, Ravi bhai, it happened in Soviet Union also. After 70 years of socialist rule, there were 12 republics coming out of the implosion of Soviet Union. 4 were Christian republics, 4 were Islamic republics, and 4 were Buddhist republics. Similarly, in People's Republic of China, there is a new kind of very aggressive nationalism promoting Hanization. So Uyghur Muslims who are Chinese in East Turkmenistan are not allowed to practice Islam. Tibetans in Tibet are not allowed to practice Buddhism. What kind of modernity is there within Soviet Union, China, who did not have this kind of a reactionary Hindutva politics? So my problem is, as you said, with the civilizational discourse, which is promoted by capitalism. Now capitalism is facing crisis, but that crisis is getting translated into cultural crisis of people in all parts of the world. America is becoming more racist. Soviet Union became ethnic. India is becoming Hindu majoritarian country. Let us continue this dialogue. We are very appreciative of your courage of conviction. You could be declared untouchable by tomorrow by all those who think that leftists made no mistake, all mistakes were made by others. You will be declared untouchable by those who think modernity was the great curse of colonialism. So I am very happy to hear you, and I'm so happy that still there are around 50 people attending this discourse for last 2.5 hours. I invite you to give us another date. I invite all the participants to keep engaging with this global dialogue forum called Gandhian School of Democracy and Socialism, which is every Friday between 7:30 and 9. And if we have a speaker like Ravi Sinha, it can become from 9 to 10 also. The other good news is that there is a good conference going to take place at Gandhian School of Democracy and Socialism from 14th April to 16th April in Gwalior, where the theme is Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations and the Gandhian Way. Because this is the global cry. We are getting defeated within the national frame that poverty, illiteracy, gender injustice, racism, social violence are getting promoted because we don't have idea of fair play, rule of law and justice. And the world is coming together under the banner of Sustainable Development Goals because this is the destiny of humanity. We cannot live with this kind of inequality, exploitation, and discrimination, destitution, and deprivation. So the future is with democracy, and democracy is safe with socialism. Socialism of human interest, socialism with human rights, with democratic rights. Thank you so much. Those who are interested in this global conference, first conference of Gandhian School of Democracy and Socialism, about to take place from 14th April to 16th April, kindly visit our website, and you can also write to us for further details. Thank you so much. I request Sri Randhir Kumarji to propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Raviji and Professor Anand, Kumar, and all friends co-present here. It was really very enriching and insightful, and your talk is a kind of invitation for all of us to engage with you in our coming dialogue. So thank you so much. We look forward for your kind participation in our coming dialogues also. Thank you.